Hello everyone, my name is Kyle Ertile and welcome to Ertile Aquatics. Today in this video, I'm going to explain to you guys how to make an ecosystem aquarium, the rough guidelines of how it's done, and what sort of things you should have in an ecosystem aquarium in order to make it virtually self-sustaining aside from feeding. So that's technically an open ecosystem, but I'm going to teach you guys, for the most part, how to utterly eliminate almost every other type of maintenance on the aquarium without making your fish sick or unhealthy. It's an ethical method, and it really takes the labor out of the aquarium hobby. And not only that, it makes your tank look beautiful, natural, and it makes your fish feel even more healthy and less stressed. Without further ado, what is an ecosystem? What makes an ecosystem, and how does the process of setting one up work? Well, let's go over that first part. What is an ecosystem? So ecosystem, plain and simple, it's a system where multiple different life forms are working together and basically piggybacking off of each other, whether that be through like predation, like just eating and killing each other, or just releasing nutrients into the environment that other organisms are feeding off of. So for an aquatic ecosystem, and I'll show you one in just a second, you really can't do a lot. I mean, if you wanted to do a closed ecosystem, you could, but the ecosystem piece goes only so far because we're not having other organisms really eat each other in here, or at least I'm not trying to have that happen. The ecosystem is right next to me right here, so that's why I'm looking this way, but I have a betta fish in there, and occasionally shittas like to try to pick at the amount of shrimp that are hiding in here. It's very hard to see them, but there are like at least like 2 or 3 darting around. But yeah, that's basically what an ecosystem is. It's just a system with different life forms that are kind of constantly intertwined, and it all just kind of works. Everything has resources and energy, and those resources and energy are shared through a food web, and they're shared and dispersed through life, death, eating and killing. It's a system essentially. And you might now be wondering, that sounds crazy. How do I fit it in a glass box? How do I make an aquarium into an ecosystem? How do I make an ecosystem tank? That is not as hard as it sounds. Very easy, because all you really need for an ecosystem, as I've heard in college from my professor, all you need really to make an ecosystem at the bare bones level is a producer and a decomposer. Now, what are those? What is a producer? What is a decomposer? Well, I'm going to turn the camera around. We're going to take a look at some producers. We're going to take a look at a decomposer, and we're going to talk about what they do, what their role is in an ecosystem, and how those 2 things alone can make a system. So, without further ado, let's turn that camera around. So here is my 6-gallon cube from Aquarium. We've got a little bit of algae on the front glass. I haven't done a water change on this tank in at least 3 months, maybe even more. But what I really want to get to here, because this is an ecosystem, because like I said, I'm not doing water changes. I don't have to do input. This tank takes care of everything. So what are these producers that I was talking about? The Anubias is a producer. The water lettuce is a producer. That Anubias is a producer. Right there, that is a producer too, believe it or not. All of these plants in this tank are producers. What does that mean? Essentially, these plants don't need to eat anything. They just produce energy. And I'm pretty sure you know how that all works through the light and photosynthesis. That's what makes them a producer, and that's what makes them so important, because they are the start point of every single ecosystem. Because energy is finite, there's only a certain amount of energy that exists, and these are the ones that are taking it from the sources like the sun and are converting it into something that life can use. And you could see, very lush, very verdant, very green in here. I'm just letting this place like get out of control, and you can see the pothos in the back. It's all roots. It's all roots. I really just let this tank go, and that's fine because the beta is happy and healthy. Sorry, I didn't mean to spook you, but she's happy, she's healthy. There's no issues here. She's very vibrant, and she's living the dream. I don't know if I mentioned, there is no filter on this tank. There is only a heater in the back because I live in a place where it gets cold and I don't have central air in my room, as you can hear from the AC in the background. So I have the heater. You can kind of see it. It's that black thing in the back there. That's what's keeping this tank at a reasonable temperature for her. I also have an air stone, as you can see in the back, just for surface agitation, so no oils build up on the surface. But aside from that, there is no filter on this tank because these plants are photorespirating. They're doing photosynthesis. I don't know if photorespirating is the correct word, so I apologize if it wasn't, but I believe it is. They're essentially just doing photosynthesis, and a byproduct of it is oxygen that is going to be loosely put in the water. That loose oxygen, she can breathe it. And the little shrimps and the little snails that are scurrying around, they can breathe the oxygen that these plants are off-putting, that these plants are shooting into the water column. They can breathe it. So that's why there's no need for a filter. Also, this pothos is doing photosynthesis, and it's doing that oxygen thing to the 1,000,000th degree, because that plant is breathing air, which is more dense in CO2. It's more dense in stuff that it can breathe, and it's then taking those excess oxygen particles and spewing them into the water through its root systems. I mean, you can see how huge the root systems are, because behind this junk is those wiry brown things. That's the roots all the way coming to the front. And this is a pothos root. You can see the pothos roots going underneath there. The pothos has a pretty tight hold on this tank. But yeah, that's essentially what producers are doing. They not only are they producing the air for this tank, they're producing energy that goes into the tank. They're also doing something very important when it comes to fish waste. So fish, primarily their urine, comes out as something called ammonia, which is insanely toxic. The only reason they can actually secrete ammonia is because ammonia is water soluble. So they can quickly and easily just secrete it without it staying in their body and causing them to die of poisoning, essentially. But when you have an aquarium in a closed box, instead of a massive lake, that ammonia that they're secreting rapidly builds up in here. Now that's where beneficial bacteria come in. Beneficial bacteria are something that's essential for the cycling of your tank. I'm not going to go into that today, but there are two types of bacteria, one that will take your ammonia and turn it into nitrite, and another that will take the nitrite and turn it into nitrate. Those two bacteria types alone make that ammonia less toxic and turn it into a nitrate, which is a nutrient for all of these plants. So these plants not only are producing energy, but they're taking the waste. So if you have enough plants, you will never need to do water changes again, because waste will never build up. Because as long as your plants are growing, and as long as you're trimming them, as long as you're keeping things maintained and taking away, those plants will continue to grow, and they will continue to take the waste out of your water, and they will not poison your fish, which is another benefit of having producers. Now I'm going to see if I can't find a decomposer to go into the decomposer section, because I only have 2 amano shrimp left in here. She slaughtered the other 2, as far as I know, and they are the exact same color as the substrate and the leaves, so they're not easy to spot, but I will try my best to find them. If I cannot, we'll just talk about decomposers normally without a look at the tank. So since I could not find the amano shrimp, I am in the other room near my other 10-gallon tank which is, as you could see, half filled, but that is for a reason. It's because I have an African dwarf frog right there. His name is Ronnie, and he needs the room to kind of, go up and down easily because they breathe air. But with that aside, this is also an ecosystem too, because you see producers. You see all these little dots, and this really big guy right here. They are all ram's horn snails, and they are decomposers. They are doing the decomposition work. See, there's snails everywhere, absolutely everywhere, because there's a lot of poop. There's a lot of detritus, detritus is essentially just filth and dead stuff, and it's everywhere. I mean, there's poop all over the place. This frog is insanely dirty. He'll poop. I feed him these little, Zoom aquatic tadpole frog stuff, and he loses his marbles and he poops everywhere. So these guys need to decompose. Essentially what decomposers do, as the name suggests, they will decompose things. They will eat poop, they will eat dying organisms, they will eat algae, they will eat plants that are rotting or dying, or even live plants. They essentially take care of stuff that needs to be broken down, stuff that is getting in the way and stuff that is becoming a problem, and they break it down to a point where it is essentially obsolete. That helps because without that, producers would be out of control. Producers would be everywhere. You would have producers left, right, and center, and when they die, they would just die and rot, and the chemicals from that rot would simply just kill them, because those bacteria I spoke about before are also decomposers, because they're also decomposing waste. And if you don't keep your waste in check, if you don't keep that rot away, then your producers will die, and so will your consumers, which are your frogs, your fish, anything else that isn't like a shrimp or a snail or a plant. All of your consumers will die from the waste as well. And now I'm going to go back into the other room. I'm going to talk about how that fits together, how you can make it work at home. So now let's talk about how the producers, decomposers, and even the consumers, which are your fish, how they all tie together, and how you can make an ecosystem work effortlessly, how to start one, how to keep it going, and how to essentially remove all your maintenance, how we can do all of that. So let's start first with producers, consumers, decomposers, how they tie together and make a ecosystem. So basically, your producers, they're producing, your decomposers are decomposing, and that's an ecosystem right there. One makes energy for itself and it starts the loop. The other one closes the loop and keeps it running. Producers produce for the decomposer to decompose, and they run in a constant circle. Now we just have to add the third ball into the mix, and we can really start juggling, and then it becomes a whole ecosystem that just keeps going in circles. So the consumers, what they're doing is they're essentially just picking away at whatever. The decomposers and producers allow for consumers to exist. If there wasn't one or the other, you could not have a consumer. Like I said before, an ecosystem can exist solely off of producers and decomposers, not off of producers and consumers or decomposers and consumers. Can't really do that because there's no opening or closing. You need the producer to open, you need the decomposer to close. You can have a consumer to bridge the gap in the middle. That consumer is just going to do maybe what the decomposer will do. You have consumers that are herbivorous, they'll eat plants. So if there's plants that are going out of control, your consumer will cut back at them. And if there's maybe too many decomposers, your consumer will cut back at them. And they will even cut back at each other. So your consumer is essentially a middle regulator to make sure that the decomposers don't get out of check and the producers don't get out of check either. And the decomposers will for sure make sure that consumers do not go out of control, because decomposers will still eat a dead fish. It does not matter. A fish dies, shrimp and snails will be on it in seconds flat. I don't recommend that you do that because it's still a ton of ammonia, especially in like if it's a 6-gallon cube like this and the beta died. No, get them out instantly, because not only is it unethical, but it's way too much for your plants and everybody else to bear. Things will die from that, so don't let that happen. But in the wild, in a natural ecosystem, yes, that's cool and it happens. But that's essentially how it all ties together. How you can get it to happen at home, though, it's not that hard. You just need to pick a few plants. You can pick easy ones or more difficult ones. You can have a wide variety, because there are a wide variety of plants. What I would recommend, though, is to get some pothos. You can get it very easily because it's a plant that bridges the gap between land and water. And for that reason, it's very good at removing waste, because it will take all the stuff that you don't want in the tank and just spit it into the air, or take all the stuff that it wants and bring it into the water. So it's very good at bridging the gap between the land and the water, and makes your ecosystem a little bit more open in that way, and it just makes it a whole league cleaner and easier. You can have floating plants like water lettuce, duckweed, red root floaters, anything like that, and those will do almost the same thing. Epiphytes, anubias, java ferns, bulbitis, bucephalandra, stuff like that. Those are great too. They're slow. They take from like the water column very nicely. Those are great. I love anubias. Anubias is a great plant. It's very good for beginners too, because like I said, or I don't know if I said it, they don't need to be rooted in the substrate. You can attach them to wood, you can attach them to rocks, you can even just let them float around. They don't need to be rooted down to anything. I mean, you can, if you want, squeeze them into the substrate, as long as that little piece is exposed, that spot called the rhizome where all the roots are coming from. As long as you leave that exposed, you're in business. You'll have something that is taking care of your nutrients. It grows insanely slow, and it's really easy to take care of and really easy to keep. It's almost impossible to kill. Stem plants too, like Hygrophila in the other tank, Ludwigia, Rotala, Bacopa, things like that. Those sorts of plants are great too, because they grow insanely fast. They're just extremely beneficial for your ecosystem, but having plants is half of the battle. Actually getting everything running and cycling is part of that process too. So when you first get your tank, I recommend getting something like Fluval stratum. It's a substrate or a gravel. Basically, it's going on the bottom of your tank, and it has a ton of nutrients in it for your plants. So when you first start, it's easier to get your tank rolling. I'd recommend getting a lot of plants. It is expensive, but it's a great way to really start. I wouldn't recommend going filterless like I did. The only reason I did that is because this is my 6th tank out of 9. I've done this multiple times, and I kind of understand how to do that. If you don't, I wouldn't really do it, because it's a risk that you shouldn't be running if you don't fully understand how to go filterless. So a small filter, nothing crazy. Aquarium has internal filters, the same brand that made my tank. They have internal filters that go as small as 3 gallons. They're insanely cheap and insanely easy to just like smack on the side of the glass and let them go nuts. Something like that would work just nice and fine for a tank like this too. So filter maybe, heater almost definitely. I don't care where you are. Well, maybe if you're in like Florida or anywhere near the equator, then I kind of care. Then it's okay. Then it's passable. But if you're not in the tropics, if your weather outside ever gets to like 60 degrees, ever, for like a constant strain of time, heater. I don't care if your house has central heating, heater, because it just helps. Somebody wants it to be cold outside one day, tank's gonna get cold too. The fish are not gonna like that. So heater, please. Heater, please. It's just, it helps. Filter, heater, light for your plants, nutrients for your plants from the substrate, and then just setting the tank up. Of course, putting in your hardscape, put the water in, make sure the water's conditioned, get the filter and heater running, then put in all of your plants, dose with bacteria, and essentially the tank will start doing something which I called cycling. I said that before, I'm not going to go into it, but the tank will cycle. After a week, not only will your plants be established, but the bacteria is going to be established. From there, you can start throwing in snails, you could start throwing in shrimp, you could start throwing in fish too. With a closed ecosystem, or an open ecosystem rather, I would recommend keeping it low on the producers or the consumers, just because too many, they will go nuts, especially if they won't regulate each other. If it's like multiple tetras, they won't regulate each other, so I'd keep it minimal. Like, I have one beta. Also, I'd keep it minimal on your decomposers too. There were ramshorn snails in here. I put an assassin snail in here and he wiped them all out as far as I know. There might be a few left, but that assassin snail will regulate. I also have amano shrimp, which are significantly harder to breed than neocaradinas or cherry shrimp, and even ghost shrimp, because sometimes you can get ghost shrimp that'll breed in fresh water, and once they do that, they breed like rabbits. So it's good to have amano shrimp, because those are caradina shrimp, little harder to breed, little easier to keep an eye on. And I actually see one right now, or at least I think I do. Yeah, that is another amano shrimp. I'm not going to turn the camera around and have you look at it because it's a shrimp, and we already went through the decomposer section. But basically, it's the same as setting up any ordinary tank. If you've ever set up a tank before, just add the plants in, let it cycle, and start introducing your fish slowly. And I'd recommend doing water changes for the first month or so, but keep an eye on your levels of like nitrites, nitrates, and ammonia. Once you see everything flatline, it will probably stay flatlined for good. If anything ever fluctuates, of course, do a water change, and of course, medicate accordingly if there's any sort of like bacterial infections or any sort of problems. But as soon as it flatlines, as soon as your nitrites, nitrates, and ammonia level out, that means that ecosystem is regulating itself. That ecosystem is doing its business, it's doing its thing. You might not have to ever worry about it again. Like this tank here, even though there is some nuisance algae, and I might suspect that there is some sort of nutrient, hike, the floating plants already exploded in number to take care of that. And once I scrape that nuisance algae, it'll never be back again because those floating plants are taking care of it. So ecosystems, for the most part, regulate themselves in terms of nutrients and everything like that. But that's basically how you set one up at home. And like I said, you can do it in any size tank. You can do it in a 6. You can do it anything. You can do 6s, 10s, 15s, 29s, 75s, 40s, 60s, 55s. It does not matter. You can do it as long as you have enough plants. The larger the tank, the more plants, the more nutrients in the substrate, and you can kind of do a little bit more with the fish and the invertebrates and the detritivores and decomposers too. But of course, the larger you get, the more you're going to spend. That's why I kept it nano in this little 6-gallon. Speaking of nano, next video we're probably going to be setting up a nano macroalgae reef. This is going to be my first saltwater build. Soft corals, macroalgae in a 10-gallon nano saltwater tank. I've never done anything like this before. It's going to be low budget. It's going to be pretty low tech. And even though it's going to be a challenge for me, I believe that I can do it, and I believe that you guys might be able to do it as well. So I'm going to be doing that in the next video. It's going to be definitely a long process. It might actually end up being a series, but we'll ride it out and we'll, see as the time comes. That's going to be a next week thing, though. Like I said, I'm not doing that right now. I'm doing that when I get back from vacation. But that's basically that. That's the entire video. I went over just about everything. How to do it at home, what you need, what a producer and a decomposer is, what an ecosystem is. It's all there for you. It's quick, it's easy, it's a lot of words. But don't let the words scare you, because it's a quick and easy, slap it together, let it cycle, and you'll never have to mess with it again kind of thing. Again, it's not a very beginner-friendly thing. There is a little bit of a finesse to it. There's patience involved, there's a lot of spending involved. There's a lot of keeping an eye on your plants, keeping an eye on the nutrition and everything, keeping an eye on how much you feed. It's something for somebody who's got a little bit more experience, maybe your second or third time around. But if you really want to try it on the first go with your first tank, be my guest, because you could definitely do it. It might just be a little bit of a learning curve. But that's just about it. I advise that everybody gets an ecosystem tank. I hope that this information was helpful, relieved any sort of stress about these big, scary, sciencey words, and I hope it was, fun, educational, and inspiring to some, at least. Of course, subscribe, all those goodies, turn on the notification bell if you have not, because like I said, that macroalgae reef tank is going to be coming soon, and it's going to be a multiple part series. We're probably going to start with the aquascape and the cycling, and starting the cycling process in the first video, and then we're going to do a video maybe 2 weeks out getting our first macroalgae, and then maybe another 2 weeks corals, and then 2 weeks after that small fish, more corals. That's at least the itinerary, or at least the idea of what I want to do. May or may not happen that way, but that's why you got to turn on that notification bell, so you can figure out how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, so you can see it and you can enjoy it. But that's been everything for me, guys. Again, my name is Kyle Ertile. This is Ertile Aquatics. Have fun with all your fishy stuff, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take it easy.